All right, good. I'll hold it here. And as an extra added bonus tonight, we have Mike Washville from our staff. He's sitting over there in Farquhar. Mike, you want to pop up your hand? There he is. Okay. So I know a fair amount of about Vint Hill. He knows a great deal about Vint Hill because, number one, he's an electronics engineer, and number two, he was stationed at Vint Hill when it was an active signals intelligence base. So if we have time for Q&A afterwards, and it's about Vint Hill in particular, he's the man. He's also one of our principal tour guides, so he knows a great deal about the Cold War, generally speaking. All right.
One, two. Oh.
Yeah. Now it works.
You can hear it? Put that in your pocket.
Yeah, I will. Absolutely. All right, to be continued. What I'm going to give you tonight is a brief run-through about the Cold War Museum, which is at Vint Hill. Some of this will be about Vint Hill as a base. A lot of it will be about what we have at the museum, because there's a covert agenda. Of course, I want you all guys all to come out to the museum. I think you'll find, if nothing else, you'll find our signals intelligence equipment highly interesting. We have, for example, multiple Collins 390As, the big surveillance go-to machine for the 50s and 60s. We have Watkins Johnson gear from 1989. We have lots of exotic and fun stuff. And we have Mike explaining it to you and give you a lot of the technical details. We also have a presentation series. We have experts on the Cold War and related topics. We've had General Michael Hayden present for us. We've had eyewitness accounts of various kinds of things. The most recent one was a Marine officer who was at Guantanamo with his troops during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The next one coming up is Inside Cheyenne Mountain, if you know what Cheyenne Mountain was and is. Of course, of course. We have a guy who was stationed there as an officer for a couple of years when it was active. So that's the kind of thing that we do. If you're interested in that kind of thing, please get in touch with me, jason@coldwar.org. I will add you to the email notification list, and you'll see all the upcoming events. All right, enough of the commercials. On with a presentation here, which I did for the Espionage Research Institute. That's an association of the sweepers, folks that go through buildings and find bugs and so on, explain the museum to them. So, Vint Hill Farms Station, known as Listening Post Number 1, and the birthplace of the National Security Agency, was also one of the primary sources of Allied interception, decryption, and translation of coded Japanese signals during World War II, including the interception of the message that stimulated the creation of the famous World War II deception called the Ghost Army. Without Vint Hill, there would not have been, almost certainly, the Ghost Army. because that's where we intercepted it. The base continued to play a key role in U.S. signals intelligence during the Cold War and also processed much of the U-2, A-12, SR-71, and satellite imagery intelligence IMINT product of that era, only closing as an intelligence base in 1996. The Cold War Museum, located in one of the former SIGINT processing barns at Vint Hill, tells the Vint Hill story. By the way, we are across the parking lot from Old Busthead, a very good craft brewery, so you can't miss. And 2 doors down from the Vint Hill Craft Winery. I mean, you really can't miss. Okay, story of Cold War, SIGINT, IMINT, Berlin activities, civil defense, the development of advanced atomic weapons, Area 51, U.S. military flying saucers, the East German secret police, the Stasi, and the Liberty and Pueblo incidents. We're friends with the crews of both of those SIGINT boats. Soviet propaganda, the cultural and Olympic competitions between East and West, and the man who saved the world, I kid you not, a guy named Vasily Arkhipov. Check him out on Wikipedia. He literally did save the world during the Cuban Missile Crisis. We tell that story. And much more. Telling the history around these topics to the general public creates challenges in terms of engaging and holding the attention of people who often have little personal experience or knowledge of that history, especially younger people. If we had more time, I would take you into the back end of this presentation, which is about the kinds of things we do to try to engage people who have virtually no background in this. But we're a little pressed for time, so I will not get into that now. All right, so that's a synopsis. On to Vint Hill Farms Station, a brief history, including its current status. In 1942, a farmer at Vint Hill, which lies between Gainesville and Warrenton, pretty close, down the road from you guys, in what is now rolling horse country, very much like Middleburg, if you've been out that way, invited a friend of his, an officer of the Army Signals Intelligence Corps, to lunch at his farmhouse. The farmer was an amateur radio operator, so of course he had friends in the Signals Intelligence Corps. And before lunch, he showed his friend something interesting, that he could hear the taxi dispatchers in Berlin talking to their cabs. Now, you guys know how difficult that might be. So that said something immediately to this guy about what might be going on at Vint Hill. Of course, the Army immediately checked this out on the sly, and within, just a few weeks, the Army shows up on his doorstep with a very large check and says, please move out within 48 hours. We have bought your farm. Bingo. Eminent domain, middle of the war. They've found what turns out to be one of the 4 best places in the world to listen to radio signals. It's that close by. So where are the other ones, of course? And of course, we asked that question to the Army Security Agency guys who used to be there. And one of them said, well, I can tell you about one of those other places because it's decommissioned. That's Two Rocks Ranch outside of Petaluma, California, north of San Francisco. Pardon?
Coast Guard training base.
Is it really now? Oh, okay. And he said, there are 2 other places, but I can't tell you where they are because they're still active. And think about it, we have such good satellite SIGINT stuff. It's pretty amazing that this base lasted until 1997, as it did, as a training facility. So I'm hoping I'm getting your interest up here. What happened? So virtually immediately, a top secret signals intelligence base with quite a few people. We believe at peak it was about 2,500. Is that about right, Mike? Yeah.
2,500 to 3,000 people.
Yeah. These people came out. Partly it was a training facility, and partly it was an active intercept facility. It was a primary, like Two Rocks Ranch, it was a primary feeder station for Arlington Hall downtown. And if you guys know something about signals intelligence, you know how important those folks were. There's a new book called Code Girls, about the work at Arlington Hall, which is primarily done by women. Really interesting book, by the way. Anybody want to guess why this is such a good place to listen to radio signals? You experts? Yeah, right on. We have lots of people who do the line of sight thing. Well, geez, we're up on a hill here, and yeah, that's fine for DC, but doesn't get you around halfway around the world to Germany, and you guys know that it's something in the soil. Nobody knows, pardon? Yeah. Yeah. So what we think is it's some kind of iron oxide. Just imagine, as I say to visitors, just imagine the largest radio antenna you've ever seen, as in about 750 acres. Turn it on its side, facing up, and sink it into the ground, and there you are. You can put antennas out anywhere of any kind, and you're going to get interesting signals from anywhere in the world. So, many of the buildings at the heart of Vint Hill are historic. We're in one of them, with some called the barns, dating to before the arrival of the Army. These were the farm's barns. We're in the horse barn, where the Army retrofitted the interiors to serve SIGINT purposes, but maintained the original exteriors, we think, for the obvious reason, for disguise purposes. The Cold War Museum is one of the the Vint Hill Craft Winery occupies another one of the barns, and the Vint Hill Craft Winery, its second floor, is where the main intercept station is, and we have lots of photographs of the World War II era stuff. We'll show you exactly what they were doing where. Okay, jumping around. Okay, we also have access to, in a separate building, this doesn't belong to us, we have access to a SCIF. You guys know about that. Almost certainly a secure, sensitive, compartmented information facility, kind of like a giant bank vault, very well protected, and from disguise, so people can't penetrate signals going in and out. All these buildings are basically right next door to each other. So let me talk a little bit about the history and the purposes of the museum. Cold War Museum was founded as an entity in 1996 by Francis Gary Powers Jr., the son of the famous U-2 pilot, and his friend John Welch. After the creation of a website, www.coldwar.org, and the accumulation of collections, the museum signed a lease with the Vint Hill Development Authority in December of 2009, opens its doors as a renovated facility in 2011 at Vint Hill. Museum's collections are particularly strong on signals intelligence, image intelligence, aerial surveillance, civil defense, Berlin, the East German secret police, Cuban Missile Crisis, and events such as the Pueblo and Liberty incidents. We're a 501c3, no surprise, and we are dedicated to education, preservation, and research on the global ideological and political confrontations between the East and West, from the end of the Cold War, end of World War II to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Basically, we've got three goals. One is to honor the service of people who had some professional role, usually in the military intelligence services, during the Cold War, to make sure that coming generations understand something about the significance of the Cold War, and to help inform people, given the fact that we're heavy on SIGINT and IMINT artifacts, to help people understand better the role of intelligence in supporting our diplomacy, our policy, and our military action. So, we are open on the weekends regularly to the public, 11 to 4 on Saturdays, 1 to 4 on Sundays, and we open for private appointments by tour groups during the week. Make a little charge for that. It's free on the weekends, but we do charge a bit for private tours where we open up the museum specially for a given group. So that might be a possibility. You guys are welcome to come individually on the weekend, but if you want to go as a group, we will open the museum for you as a group. Not a problem. We do this all the time. Let me flip through here. Okay, I'm going to skip a little bit here because we're a little short of time. I mentioned our presentation series, and so I'll jump ahead. So let's go right to the fun stuff for you guys. Bingo! There it is. This is part of our Vint Hill room where we specialize in telling the story of Vint Hill. You see that large stack, the top one closest to you, that's a Collins 390. You see the short stack with the blue, okay? That's the Watkins-Johnson 1989 receiver, and the stuff in between, that's chronologically in between. So we pretty much cover the waterfront in terms of the classic surveillance gear, purpose-built surveillance gear of the Cold War time. Typically here we focus on telling the story of World War II. We're, of course, the Cold War Museum. So World War II is a little out of our purview, but Vint Hill was so important during World War II, and so much of what it was doing during the Cold War depends on what it was doing and pioneered doing during World War II, that of course we tell that story too. We tell parts of some of the things we cover at in this particular area are the discovery of the sensitivity of the site, which I told you about, Army's creation of the base, explanation of how the site related to Bletchley Park. In this way, this base specialized in the Japanese signals because Bletchley Park was already all over the German signals. In addition, this is one of the first places in the American military where women were allowed to do anything other than cook, clean, and do other routine tasks. Pardon? Well, yeah, right, yeah. I mean, much more active stuff that was much more like what the men were doing. We have some photographs of some of the women that were out at Vint Hill who were intercept operators and who, some of whom were cryptanalysts. Most of the cryptanalysts were downtown at Arlington Hall, but we had some out. Mike, do you know, during World War II, did they have computers?
No, all of the computational capability was at Arlington Hall, because that's
I'm
where
talking
the
about the people
analysis
who
was
were
conducted. So Vint Hill basically was collection. You had HF receivers, you had recorders, you had the little tape printer units that they used, but all the computational work was done by the folks at Arlington Hall.
So we talk about a description of the Ghost Army, what that was for people that don't know what the Ghost Army was and the role of Vint Hill in it. We talk about Sig Sally. If you're into this kind of stuff, you can go to the website of the National Cryptographic Museum and find out what Sig Sally was. We explain because Vint Hill had a role in that during World War II. Basically, it was figuring out a very, very secure way, the first very, very secure way to code up voice transmissions. To code up voice transmissions during World War II, because of course the Brits and Americans had to talk all the time. Cover some of that. We have photographs of some of the Japanese-American soldiers who were stationed at Vint Hill to help translate messages that were decrypted at Vint Hill and needed to be translated for use. And that's kind of fun, because they look just like Japanese soldiers, except they're wearing American soldiers. They're wearing American uniforms, and they have, in certain of the pictures, they have leis on, playing their ukuleles, I mean, showing their Hawaiians. Okay, and Mike has set up some screens in there that talk about the coding stuff and about Enigma. Yes, we talk about it. Wish we had an Enigma machine, but a little too pricey for us. Okay, so onward. What else do we have? Well, we have a lot of stuff on civil defense. That is, when the DC Civil Defense Headquarters, which was at Lorton Prison, decommissioned, we got all their stuff. So we have all their hardware, including their Geiger counters and their dosimeters. We run a copy of the famous Duck and Cover movie that all the elementary school kids had to see, so they get a sense of what that was. We are just about to get, as a donation from another museum, some of the civil defense medical supplies during the Cold War. That'll be a wonderful addition to our civil defense collections. Let's see, what else? We actually have the plan of the DC Civil Defense Headquarters, and if we need to, if we ever had the space, we could reconstruct it. This next photo is something a little different. Yes, well done. We called it the SA-2, but you were right. That's what the Russians called it. Well, here it is. Looks fun, right? We own this. You see that on display? That's at COSI, a big sci-tech center in Cincinnati. We lent it to them. This is our missile. What we have on display, because we are a fairly tiny museum, is the booster. See the white part at the very far end, okay? That's all we could get through the door, because it's 34 feet long, the whole thing. So we keep the rest of it, the gray part, in its can in the warehouse, and we rent it out to large museums. Now, why do we have an SA-2 or 75? Because this was the first kind of Soviet surface-to-air missile which could shoot down U-2s. This was the kind of missile that shot down Francis Scary Powers. This is the missile that shot down a lot of other U-2s, including Walter Anderson's U-2. Yes, exactly, yeah. The Russians were a little behind us oftentimes in fighter technology, but they were damn good in missile technology. They moved fast. Okay, so what else? That is the famous Bridge of Spies. It's a Glinicky Bridge. And the reason we show that, and a copy of the movie Bridge of Spies, of course, because the first spy exchange on that bridge was Francis Scary Powers and Rudolph Abel. And after that, it became the place to do spy exchanges. Francis Scary Powers Jr., our co-founder, was a technical advisor on the movie. So of course we asked him, hey, how accurate was the movie? And he said, well, they mess with a few technical details, like if you look really closely at the camera that's supposed to be the camera for U2, it's not really the camera for U2. They swapped it out. We actually have a U2 camera. You want to see what the real thing looks like? We got it. We'll show it to you. Yeah, we know it doesn't look quite right. But he said otherwise, and certainly in terms of the atmosphere of the time and in terms of the way his dad was treated, very accurate. Okay, so what else? Hang on. Berlin. This is part of our Berlin exhibit, just a part of it, but it's my favorite part. We have a piece of the Berlin Wall. Lots of people have pieces of the Berlin Wall. You can buy them on the internet. Ours is pretty big. I did a cost estimate based on size because the money goes by size. Ours is probably worth about $2,000 because it's a pretty big chunk. It has a picture of the DDR on it. Okay, so who's this guy? This is the last casualty of the Cold War. A guy, hang on a second. is a photograph of Major Arthur Nicholson. He was a military liaison officer, and we talk about what military liaison missions were about. They were spies. They were military spies. He was an Army intelligence officer. We had an arrangement with the Sovs and they with us, such that by arrangement theirs could come to our side and we could go to their side, ostensibly to check and make sure that troops weren't massing for an attack, which of course would be a tank attack through the Fulda Gap. Well, everybody knew that that wasn't what it was really about. It was an opportunity to spy as much as you possibly could. Now, of course, everybody was tailed, and you know you had limited opportunities. But sometimes you could get lucky, and it appears that Major Nicholson got pretty lucky one day in doing his mission of getting inside a tank warehouse on the other side and running a count. Now we were looking down. The problem was we couldn't tell how many. We could do the estimate in terms of size, but you have to know how many tanks in a row in order to run the numbers. So one of his important jobs was to break into a tank farm and see if he could run a count and also get photographs and et cetera, et cetera. So apparently he did some of that, and the Sovs were not happy, and the next time he crossed the border, they shot him point blank. No talk, just boom. And let him bleed out in the tarmac. So there's a memorial to this guy in Berlin. Army officers who serve in Berlin, they all know about this guy. And we tell his story. Well, we don't tell his story because we've got a photograph which anybody can get off the internet. We tell his story because those two license plates are actual military liaison license plates. Pretty rare stuff. If you can't see it here, but if you look closely, that stuff is in, I guess you can see a little bit. It's in Russian. Yeah, it's in Cyrillic. And if you look at the sign, that's a real military liaison sign in 4 languages saying, don't look at this stuff, which of course it was their job to do. All right, other stuff. The Baltic Sea incident. That's what this little poster's about. So this is where we switch over from telling the Berlin story to talking about IMINT, aerial surveillance and image intelligence. And we start back at the beginning of the Cold War. Beginning of the Cold War, we were sending lumbering planes like this to try to do image intelligence, fly and look down sideways at the Soviet Union. Not terribly successful when you have a large country like that. Can't cover much ground. But you sure wouldn't fly over Soviet airspace and something like this, boom, shot down immediately. So that's the best we could do initially. 1950, our guys are flying as usual in international airspace, so shot them down anyhow. Not happy they were there. And the question was, what happened to these guys? They were all missing in action. Big international incident called the Baltic Sea incident. Plane was called a privateer. So let me tell you about how we get some information filled in, some blanks filled in. So one day I'm standing about where this is, and I'm given a tour, and a little old lady wheels through the door. She's in a wheelchair. Her daughter, who's a California professor, is wheeling her in. And she says, do you guys have anything on the privateer? And I say, well, yeah, not a whole lot. We got this poster, we got photographs of the crew, which we do. Happy to tell you the story. And she says, don't bother, I'm the wife of the pilot. Yeah, okay. So immediately I say, please tell us your story, which she does. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. What she says is, I kept sending letters to Moscow and they stonewalled me, would never respond. Of course not. And then she says, it turned into Russia and I decided I would try one more time. Bingo. She gets a letter back. This time they say, actually we do have some stuff on your husband from our archives, but you got to come to Moscow to check it out. So she goes to Moscow wearing that black jacket, which she subsequently gave to us. The POW jacket you see in there. That's not one of our artifacts. And here's what she found out. She could see the archival materials. He had been one of the survivors. And the archives could track him through various Soviet prison camps, about 2 or 3, and then the archival trail died out. Not unusual. I'm a historian by training. Not unusual for this kind of thing to happen. But she knew for sure that now that he had survived and he died in a Soviet prison camp. This kind of person who fills in these kinds of gaps arrives at the museum fairly frequently. We correct some of the things we're saying. We add to what we're saying. And if you're lucky, when you come out, you'll see some of these people. People who know a lot about this, who've been professionally involved, they really like our museum. Like, for example, we had the folks from the staff from the CIA museum, and as you know, you can't get in there. They came out to our museum. They really liked it. They were fun to talk to. Asked them a few questions about movies that we've all seen, you know, how real is that, and interesting answers. They'd all seen a few skiffs, if you know what I mean. Okay, so let me see. What's next up here? Local schools?
To invite people to come in and talk about their lives in the Cold War.
We wish we had the staff to do that. What we are doing is filming all of our presentation series. We have about 16 or 17 that we've done, and these are all eyewitnesses or other experts to Cold War, key Cold War events, and so we're recording that as a kind of oral history. If we had more staff and interns, yeah, we would love to catch more people before they die to tell their stories. We do have a volunteer program, but it's not big enough. We have our volunteers come, believe it or not, our key volunteers come every single weekend. They are the museum on the weekends, giving the tours. I mean, I show up and I do all the back office stuff. So we are tiny. We need more support. We need more volunteers, believe me, to do lots and lots of things. Okay, so what do we have here? This is a fragment of Major Anderson's U-2, the one that was shot down over Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I kid you not. Some of these things, I really wonder how we got them. I've heard some stories about that you wouldn't want to tell a lot of people about how we got some of this stuff. But much of it comes, let me put it this way, through the connections that Francis Gary Powers Jr. has. Okay, what else? Yes, we have film that was shot from an SR-71 Blackbird. If you're curious about the optics, we have the film. This is interesting because there aren't too many rolls of SR-71 film that aren't still classified. This is one of the few. This was a training mission over Washington, D.C. If you look at that, you can look down and see the Potomac.
When I visited, I was able to see my house.
Really?
SR-71 or 812?
Good for you. Of course, our friends from the CIA museum staff are happy to remind us repeatedly that this plane was not built for the Air Force. It was built for them. And the original form was the A-12. We have lots of photographs of it as an Air Force plane, which is a subsequent model. And the difference is as follows. It's not about the markings. It's about whether it's a one-seater or a two-seater. The A-12 is a one-seater. The SR-71 is a two-seater front to back, okay? Otherwise, basically exactly the same plane.
The second seat in the SR-71 is where the big camera in the A-12 went. So they have a different camera for the SR-71.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Learning new things.
I heard the SR-71, there was a variant that was designed to carry nuclear weapons. Was that?
Well, there are lots of.
There were, the Air Force turned down this plane initially. It was the CIA that wanted it. And then they saw that it was really cool, and they kind of rethought it. So
YF-12. There was a YF-12.
YF-12.
that was, what was the drone?
That was the one that tried to be an interceptor.
Ah, yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
that's actually right, Patterson. That's what the YF-12 is, right?
Ah.
And the drone is there too, by the way.
Yeah.
The M12 and the
Mhm.
D21.
Yep.
There were a few practical problems. You know, Air Force is all into, you know, where's our guns? You know, where's our missiles? Where's our bombs? This is not our kind of plane. And then they kind of rethought it. You know, maybe this would be cool. Yeah, and so somebody gave a few minutes thought to, oh yeah, wouldn't it be cool to be able to be flying this fast, as in 2,100 miles an hour, and launch your missiles? And then somebody gave it another 30 seconds of thought, well, maybe not such a good idea because you're going to outrun your missiles and get hit by your own missile. This plane at mission speed was literally the fastest airplane, the fastest air-breathing piloted aircraft ever made by far. Soviets never were even close. Because Eisenhower said, you know, after the U-2, look, I don't want any of our planes to get shot down again. You know, if we're doing surveillance, it has to fly higher, as in 90,000 feet plus, and faster, as in 2,100 plus miles an hour, than anything the Soviets could ever put up, missiles or fighter planes. Tall order, and of course, Lockheed Skunk Works delivered. We're not flying these anymore. $1 million a mission. Kind of pricey, even by DoD standards. However, you may not know that we are still flying U-2s for military purposes. They are very similar, just a little bit larger with better surveillance equipment. But it's basically the same design, late 50s design. That one went 70,000 feet. Not bad for late 50s technology. We tell you about all this stuff, of course. Okay, what else? Let's see. So, here's where we talk about satellites. And the person that tells you about satellites, particularly the image intelligence phases of them, our guy who does that on the weekends, he is a retired CIA image analyst of 35 years. He used to do this. He used to look at Dolan Airfield, the big Soviet strategic bomber base, every day, run a count, see if they had new models, et cetera, et cetera. He'll talk to you about that. Show you the light tables. We have light tables of the kind the guys would use to do this kind of work. Okay.
That's probably the funnest part of the museum, the light tables.
You like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right, so this is the one I love to end with. Mao's ear. We don't have a lot of human intelligence stuff. We would like to build that out. But this is a unique object, I kid you not. This is a one of a kind. What you see is something that was built by the CIA technical staff for CIA image analysts for a particular purpose. Mao had lots and lots of body doubles. This is very common, particularly for dictators, who always have to appear strong and in charge. They can never be sick. They can never be, as Mao was all too often, visiting girlfriends on office time. He had lots of girlfriends. So he had lots of body doubles. So here's the problem. If you are looking at photographs, it's extremely important to know whether that's actually Mao or not, because it determines the chain of reasoning that you use. So how do you figure out whether it's Mao or one of the body doubles? Turns out our ears are as unique as our fingerprints. So they got a photograph that they were dead sure was actually of Mao, blew it up, and the tech staff built a plaster model of Mao's ear so that the analysts could compare a given photograph to Mao's ear and determine whether it was real or not. This is an example. We use this to explain how intelligence people use ingenuity to solve verification problems. Have I got you? You want to come? All right. So all you have to do is send me an email, jason@coldwar.org. You want to do a private tour. If you want to show up for free, that's cool. But if you all want to come together, which we've found a lot of people like to do, because we will give you a personalized tour depending on your own background and interests. And you get the museum entirely to yourself. We've accommodated as many as 90 people. Even though we're a small museum, we've accommodated as many as 90 people. We have to rotate people through. We have to organize it with the brewery and the winery, which is not too hard. Yeah. Yes, sir.
What's your cost for a private tour?
It's for a group of 10 or fewer, it's $20 a person. For a larger group, 11 plus, it's $15 a person. We try to keep it reasonable. The reason we have free hours, even though we are desperately poor, is that we want to make sure that families who are dropping by with little kids and stick their nose in the door will actually come through, because we want them to spread the word about us. And we do make money on these private tours, and we make money on the presentation series. Those are all fundraisers for us, et cetera, et cetera. Love to have volunteers too. Yes, sir.
I was talking to Mike some time ago, and I asked him a question. Pardon me, Mike, I forget. I asked Mike this some time ago, and pardon me forgetting about it, but are you all ever planning a special event radio station out there?
Oh, I love this. What a wonderful question. We would love to have the package of a group of experts like you because of this equipment. I mean, we would love to have this equipment used more often. I think you guys might find it fun just to be at Vint Hill, try your own equipment out. I think you might find it really interesting. And if you like to play with purpose-built surveillance stuff, we have a guy, the man we can't name, because he's a
If you hold the wire around.
There's the
mic-
transmitter.
like this. Okay. Yeah, that's better. Yep, that's connection. Looks like
Yeah, like you hold the wire.
feedback loop. Okay. So we have a guy who set up this stuff. We used to name him, and then he used to work full-time for various folks in the community, and they got wind of the fact that we were proudly naming him in our newsletters. We do with all of our volunteers, or key volunteers. They didn't like that, so we had to pull his name, and we don't talk about him anymore, but except the man we cannot name. Anyhow, he got our equipment so that it can run. I know he did the Watkins-Johnson stuff, and he set that up so that that is running, so you can play with that when you come out there. It's running all the time, because we tune in people like you on the weekends, so they can hear them. We would love to have you guys come out and think about whether you would like to work with us. We need expertise like this.
We have members who specialize in old equipment.
Great.
We have old members who are just
We specialize in old equipment, yeah. Yes, sir.
What bus routes go out that way, and do they run on weekends as well as weekdays?
As far as I know, there isn't anything out that runs out that line. I wish that were the case. Winery tour buses? The winery has tour buses that go?
I've seen several of them out there toward, past Vint Hill, so I'm sure they'd be willing to stop at Vint Hill.
Yeah. Okay, well, there's your possibility. Was it the Vint Hill Craft Winery that had the buses, or was it somebody else? Somebody further around.
Peter something winery.
Yeah.
It's on 29.
Yeah.
28.
I'm thinking that if that's an inconvenience for you, that maybe you would want to come out with some other folks. You want to carpool with other folks that might be interested in doing this.
I'm saying that the industry exists, so maybe they'd be willing to, give you the rates for whatever it is.
That's a possibility. Yeah. Other questions? Okay. If you have technical, yes, sir.
Any antennas still existing out there at all?
I don't think there are, Mike, are there? Except the big one on the post.
The intercept antennas that were there were removed after the base was closed in '97, and actually, if you look on the web, there is a local ham that bought the rhombics, bought the towers and the hardware, and took it, and is, I guess, trying to reassemble it on his farm somewhere. Yep. When I was there in 1983 to 1984, there were about 6 big rhombics on the antenna field. And those things are 600 feet long, about 120 feet wide, 70 feet tall. And they provide very good gain on HF because they're huge antennas.
Was there ever an elephant cage?
No, not a full-size elephant cage. The only thing they had there that was a circular antenna array, there was a TRD-15 direction finder that was out along Vint Hill Road. It had 24 antennas in a circle, 1 reference antenna in the middle, and then the actual truck. And that was basically a pseudo-Doppler DF system.
Anybody else? All right, thanks very much, folks. Come see us. Thank you.
How realistic was the TV show, The Americans? Did you see that?
I have an answer for that because we have one of our speakers